Welcome to the Sales Leaders Operating System, the podcast for sales leaders who know that success starts with strong leadership. Whether it's your first time leading a team or you're a seasoned pro, we've got the real-world advice you need to lead your team to greatness. Now, here's your host, Matt McDarby.
Hello and welcome to the Sales Leaders Operating System, the podcast for sales leaders, built by sales leaders. This is Matt McDarby. I'm your host and author, coach, and advisor to elite sales leaders all over the world. Thank you so much for joining us. In today's episode, I'm actually joined by a few people that I need to introduce to you, so let me do that right now. I'm so thrilled to have my next two guests. I've got to introduce them both before I welcome them officially to the show. So, Corey Schwitz's early career experiences were rooted in venture capital-backed businesses, ranging from early-stage tech to commercial theater productions to consumer products. He then branched into the world of revenue operations and founded a RevOps, Salesforce, and HubSpot partner firm called Skydog Ops. We'll hear a little bit more about them in just a little bit. My other guest, David Levy, started his career doing audit work at EY. He then entered the tech business, serving in sales and go-to-market roles at Apptelligent, then VMware, and then Tray.io, which apparently now is Tray.ai. In 2021, he became the co-founder and chief business officer at Aircover, a generative AI tool that empowers and enables sales reps in live sales calls and post-call guidance. Please welcome David Levy and Corey Schwitz to the show. Gentlemen, welcome to the Sales Leaders Operating System.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having us, Matt.
Yeah, I'm thrilled. Now, what I didn't mention when I gave you a quick bio is you guys have known each other for quite some time. Who wants to dive in and explain the kind of when did you meet? How long have you known each other? Give us some of that, and then I'll dive in with my questions.
Dave, you want to hop in there?
It goes way back. We've our parents were friends when we were younger. Essentially when we were babies. Stroller buddies, as they like to say. Yeah. So it's been some time, and I'm grateful for our friendship, and it's fun that it's now intersected also into business. I like to say that my family's been clients of the Schwitzes for a while. His dad's an orthodontist, and I used him growing up, along with 99% of Monmouth County, New Jersey, and then our business at Aircover is also a client of Skydog. So it's I can't wait for my kids to be clients of his kids.
Can't get away from them, right? It's just everywhere you go, Corey's there.
I can't speak for my father's practice, but I know Dave was a good customer to us and continues to be. So like Dave said, it's really been fun that our careers and the sectors we work in have intersected, and it allows for a lot of good conversation and different sharing of best practices, ideas, tools, etc.
Awesome. So it sounds to me like there's a fairly high level of trust established between the two of you, right? Built up over the years. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of wedge my way in here and ask you guys a bunch of questions about your experiences and join the circle of trust between Dave and Corey. That's what we're doing here in today's episode of the Sales Leaders Operating System. Now, gentlemen, you both know this because I've explained this to you, and the audience knows one of the kind of key areas of focus for the show is systems thinking as it pertains to running a sales organization or a revenue organization. The reason that we've made it a theme is over the years, the best sales leaders that I've known and worked with and observed have kind of a system or a way of making sense of all the complexity of a revenue organization. We've even changed the name of the show, right? We used to call this show something else. Now it's the Sales Leaders Operating System. So my first question is about the system. You both have been very successful in your own businesses in your own right. You're founders and you run your own teams, and you work closely with revenue leaders today in your respective businesses. So give me your take on this. What would you say are the most important parts of a successful revenue leader's system?
Corey, you want to take that? Yeah.
I'll hop in here. Yeah, there are similarities in that both Dave and I are his product Aircover and our service. We're serving a similar audience of really sales, revenue, and company leaders. For us, we don't have our own in-house sales team. We have a more of a consulting model where most of these sales themselves are going through myself and my COO. But we have the benefit of seeing tons of different types of businesses across industries, sales processes, et cetera, different models. And what we do, we implement, customize their CRM, and really have it fit what is somewhat of an existing sales process, maybe helping refine it, clarify it a little bit more. But just for us, I really think that the one thing that really comes to mind for me is just the foundation really, really matters. That's not 100% the same thing as keep it simple. I think getting the foundation right is keep it simple maybe to start. But overall for us, companies are coming to us with different sorts of sales processes that are defined, not defined, complicated, tech stacks that are same thing, defined or not, data. And what's important for us is to come in, really start. What I like to do is start with maybe one team, one process. So maybe it's just the sales team, maybe it's just the lead generation process, and making sure we really have that down pat, clarified, and ultimately reflected into a system that's certain data points, stages, what have you. So just the importance of getting that first thing right is really vital, because that's the foundation that everything is really built upon. Trying to do too much, if companies come to us and expect, hey, we have this marketing, sales, customer success, onboarding, finance process that we want to get in the system, ultimately that tends to be less successful, because you're trying to do too much at once and can't really focus on getting that foundation right that should be able to, in our world, creating systems, last for many, many years. And ultimately, what I'm saying there is it's not the same thing as keep it simple, because we want to build a foundation where it's strong enough that you can build that complexity on top of that for the future.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to come back to you, Corey, and ask you some clarifying questions about the foundation and keeping things simple. Dave, I'm curious, maybe you have a different perspective, or you would add on to Corey's answer. So talk to me about your view of what an effective system looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with everything Corey said. I think a strong foundation is really important. And, having hired reps and sales leaders, I think it kind of translates to this important foundation also, which is making sure that you're hiring the right people and putting in the right systems for your needs. And so it's kind of a classic startup book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And he talks about how you should really hire for your needs in front of you. So if you're going from, 0 to 1 or 1 to 10 or 10 to 100, to hire those people. And so when we went to go hire, a VP of sales recently, we talked to some leaders that had managed publicly traded companies, $100 million plus books of business, can add an incredible amount of value. But, what we need right now and for, the next, call it 2 years, is really that leader to come in, be able to help us take us to that next level, be able to roll up their sleeves, get into deals. And I think so much of it goes back to also what Corey is talking about, because when you're hiring, they're probably thinking about, those two personas will think about two different aspects. In other words, if you hire that $100 million person, they're probably, and you really only need to get from 1 to 10, they're going to be thinking about a lot more complexities that maybe you don't need, where you just need that foundational stuff that Corey just touched on.
All right. So hire the right people, put the right system in place to get the outcome you want, right? I'm way oversimplifying here, but those are kind of some of the things you said there, Dave. Corey, I want to hear more about the foundation. I'm curious, and I know it's hard. You've worked with a lot of different organizations over the years, but if you think about the businesses that generate the most consistent or consistently good performance, do you notice anything in the foundation, right? The foundation of those systems, you'd be like, I think it's always like, these are the things I notice, because I'm really curious to hear what you're observing there.
Yeah, I do think the company, it's funny, companies, how they work with us is a reflection ultimately of sort of how well run they are as a company. And we see a pretty strong correlation between like how smooth the process is to getting a system live to how their company does. And I don't mean that in taking credit for that at all, but in it's sort of in the same way as how you do anything is how you do everything. So without going too much on a tangent there, I think I put like the analogy of like a really good SWAT team. What they're not doing is saying, hey, let's go into this house and go into every room as fast as you can and kind of handle it. It is a very tactical, process oriented, like one room cleared at a time, which is an analogy that I like to think about with regards to like building systems and taking it back to like, we work with a fast growing robotics company for construction sites. And they came to us already having a pretty complex process, but they were very on board with sort of handling the processes they needed. Ultimately, what would become a full cycle system, but one by one. First starting with the sales process, then all the different data points and stakeholders at these project sites, then eventually getting into inventory management. Hopefully I answered that there.
Yeah. Well, basically the foundation, what I'm hearing you say is it's kind of like the orientation, or they're taking a more systematic approach to building out a foundation before they, kind of build fully and build every process for every corner of the business. They're taking essentially, that's the one room at a time thing, right? Let's be kind of thoughtful about this is the first change we're trying to inflict. And that's going to put us in position to maybe put some other processes in place and improve in other areas. Is that kind of the net of it?
Yeah, I'd say so. And Dave's seen this too. When you're at a startup, your list of things that you could get done and that would drive value is pretty endless, right? You basically have no process. Everything needs to be started, from the sales process to what HR system are you using to how the website looks. But the best teams are able to really prioritize those in the right order and tactically take them out one by one.
Yeah, those are where maybe you'll see the video later. I'm pointing at Corey as he says, prioritize, right? Because that's the thing I'm hearing, that a key part of the system is prioritization, figuring out, because like to your point, there may be, if we've got a business that we hope will be a fast growing sort of a business, we can envision we're going to need the process for defense and expansion. We're going to need our kind of net new customer pursuit process. We're going to need and establish all, but you can't do all those things at the same time effectively, especially if it's a small operation, right? And speaking just from a leader's perspective, there's only so much brain power I can expend on making sure this process is right before I can move on to the next. And that's not knocking leaders, but my experience, probably like yours, has been like, I think we can inflict too much change at all at once. And if we know that, we've been burned by that at least once, we're like, okay, let's slow it down and figure out what's the first thing. So what I'm taking away is prioritization is another really key part of the system, so to speak. Dave, you were going to maybe say something in response.
Yeah, just to jump in there, I think a big part of to make that successful, what you both were just touching on, is over communicating. And so I think communication is an incredibly important part of that system. For example, like what we do is we take our board deck that we are presenting at the board and we share that with the company. So everyone knows the priorities of the company, because like Corey said, at a startup, but it really is applicable to many businesses, big and small, is you can just work on so many different things in a given day. When you're looking at your pipeline, which opportunities should you really be focusing your energy on? Which leads should you really be spending your time with? If the business is trying to double down in financial services, should I be spending my time going after technology leads? The only way that the team is going to know that is if leadership is over communicating and being really clear with what the priorities are and what the goals are. And it's so easy to get caught up in, the leadership team talking about what the priorities are and forgetting that you're not actually saying that to everyone all the time. And then even if you feel like you've said it, 100 times to your team, you probably need to tell it to them another 100 times for it to land. So I think over communicating would be another really important part to that process.
Yeah. Because if they haven't heard and understood it, then we haven't communicated it, right? I mean, but I hear in my work, I work with, having been one, and I'm an interim and a fractional leader, and I coach and advise leadership teams now. And it's a pretty common complaint. It's like, do we really have to explain to this team again what's expected of them? And I'm like, yeah, actually you do. Until they really understand not just what you're there to achieve and why it's important, but how the work is to be done. Like they can tell it to you the way you would tell it to them. Until that happens, you got to keep going, right? Until they demonstrate that they understand that. All right, so here we are. One question: what are the elements of an effective system? We've got, in no particular order, right? Build the foundation, keep it simple, hire the right people. I want to come back to that. Easier said than done, right? But take this, clear one room at a time approach. Prioritization is key, and communication, but clear communication, right? I'll tell you both, and I know you both have heard other episodes, like those ring true, and I've heard similar things from leaders and people that work closely with leaders. So I'm like, okay, then there's something to this, right? I'm really curious about, because you've both seen, participated in, witnessed, been present for some tremendous successes. I'm going to presume maybe some failures too, where organizations, they're trying to drive a change in their organization and they are wildly successful at it, or conversely, they really struggle to drive change and adapt and kind of seize the growth opportunity that they wanted to capture for themselves. What from those experiences, and I'll just ask you both to sort of chime in and give your own answers. What's the most important lesson that you've each learned so far about effectively leading a revenue team? What's the main kind of the big lesson? Give me one or two.
Yeah, I think one thing that stands out to me is just not trying to do everything yourself. To really develop the people around you, give them ownership and accountability for the outcomes associated with it. It's very easy, as a startup founder, especially when you're transitioning from, for example, founder-led sales to hiring a team, you have the answers a lot of the times. A lot of times you actually don't have the answers, and that's why you're trying to hire, going back to what we talked about before, hiring great people who know a lot more than you. And so, to the extent that you can share your knowledge in an effective way, give people agency to be able to make their own decisions. It's something that I'm trying to always keep in mind, and it's something I've seen has been valuable. I know Corey also, just being the owner of his business and scaling his team, he's gone through similar as well. He always knows the right answer, though. That's the issue there.
That's a blessing and a curse.
I think that's
right?
a tinge of sarcasm.
But Corey,
no, that's gospel right there.
No, I'm taking David at his word. I'm taking him at 100% at his word. Here's what's required, though, right? And we're joking about it, but in all seriousness, in some environments, you may be as the founder, you are the sort of supreme subject matter expert. It's reasonable to expect that you would know a lot more about your subject matter than people that you're hiring new to the business, for example. But in order to lead others and to do what Dave's describing, which is to, don't try to do everything yourself, there's a pretty heavy dose of humility there, right? Or, you have to sort of work against, and I'm a founder too. I'm 15 years in with my business, but it's there's a certain amount of pride or pridefulness associated with being in that role. And so I can tell you firsthand, Corey, I don't know what your experience is with this or if you've overcome this, but that pride of it, I really do know this better than everybody, because it becomes a barrier to giving, to giving other people responsibility and letting people do things their way, which ultimately might be better. Corey, I don't know if you have any reaction to that. That was a lot of words. So I'm going to ask you to sort of parse through what I just said.
Yeah, I think part of that is one, obviously sort of getting a little bit over your own like hubris, and really bucketing things into one. No, this is the way we really do things because it is foundational to our model, and will be this 5 years from now, 10 years from now, which I can talk about what those are for Skydog. Those are not going to change, versus just different styles and ways of doing things that could be better. So, when I started the business, there were ultimately more junior people on average. So yeah, I was kind of had more business experience, had more experience in our specific domain. But just over time and very quickly, both from people skilling up and hiring, you definitely and should, as Dave's noting, from like building a better team, have people that are better than you. And I think it's really important to also like broadcast that, because something I've seen as a potential downside is then people can get into senior roles and have this natural pressure on themselves to think I need to be better than everyone junior to me in every single aspect. And that's really not what it's about. So I try to make sure, when the team, especially someone's like special at something, whether it's they're insanely proactive, they're a great communicator, they're great at this technical skill, to make sure that that's very clear to them, that is a strength of them. They can have that security and know, hey, I can look to other people, including up and down the ladder, for people that can round out those skill sets. So I think naturally, if you're hiring and training people in the right way, that's going to happen. But it's also important for people to like understand, like, leaders don't need to be the best. Obviously they're going to be strong in some aspects, but in what got them there. But it's important to celebrate and call people out all across the company in that way.
Okay, well said. Yeah, I that's a great point. And that was a build on what Dave offered as his big lessons learned. So what's yours? Is there any other like big lessons you've learned about how to lead a consistently effective team?
Yeah, it's funny that when you asked that, I was thinking about something that David said prior about my biggest learnings, which is just the need to be constantly communicating. And Dave said over communicating. I think about like the need to just be constantly evangelizing your message internally to the company. Someone who's a friend of both of ours and a successful entrepreneur, Dan, had this blog post on being the chief reminding or chief repetition officer. And when we had, whether it was like a new way of doing things or an internal value we really wanted to talk about, I realized I was spending a lot of time talking to senior leaders and maybe specific people on like what the theme was, and spending a lot of time in my head thinking, oh, people need to do this. But what I wasn't doing enough was constantly being that reminder and hitting on themes constantly. So whether it's one-on-one feedback, internal training sessions, for us at Skydog, that's like what our two foundational skills and focuses are, which are one, constantly being proactive, and two, deeply understanding our client businesses. Our client's business. And, I found myself being frustrated when, there seemed to be like a lack of focus on that, or maybe someone wanted to develop technical skills before really getting those cemented. But really, I came back to that, the realization over time that if it's not clear to the team, we're not saying it enough, or we're not being as clear as we think we are, which is a motto that Adam, Skydog CEO, and I constantly have with each other, is we're not being as clear as we think we are. So that over communication and constant reminding seems like a nagging in a way, and I don't want it to be negative. It's more of that consistent evangelizing, like I said from the top.
Well, I think the thing we can take away from what you're saying is you acknowledge that your role as a leader is to make sure that people are reminded and clear about really important things, right? And if they aren't, it's not necessarily their fault or their responsibility. You're owning that and saying, okay, maybe we have to do a better job of being clear about this stuff, right? That's what I heard. I don't know if that's what you meant.
Yeah, for sure. And, one time, a longtime team member once said, that he found the quarterly and annual recaps, that the message kind of is being repeated a lot. It wasn't said in a negative or critical way, just an observation of like, it's better for the new people. And I took that as a great compliment of, we're hammering it home. And for that, it was this constant need to be finding what's most valuable for our clients so we can retain and expand them. And, again, zooming out 5 years, that message isn't going to stop being repeated. So I know we've hit on a good one to come back to.
Yeah, that's great. No, I've gotten feedback from people on my teams that I'm very consistent, and I do try to hit the same notes, and so kind of on the same page with you there. The thing that I fear, that I try to avoid, is, there are leaders that are sort of always on to the next thing, right? This is the new message, or this is how our fundamentals are changing, and it's like a quarterly exercise. And I think what they don't realize is you come off as, it's almost like your decision making is kind of capricious at that point. It just sort of changes with the wind, and it's like, no, I think people really value having consistency at the leadership level, right? And I think that's great feedback. I'd love to hear that from my team. Like, hey, we're saying the same things. I'm like, well, yeah, until those things have to change, right? Until what we're trying to achieve or how we go about our work changes, it's going to sound pretty much the same. That's great. I love that. Dave, you mentioned earlier, and I said I would come back to it, because this idea of hiring the right people. I don't know if there's anything harder than hiring the right people, especially with a growing business like that's on a kind of a fast trajectory. Have you picked up anything in particular about, like, how do you make sure? Here's an example. I'll connect a few things we've talked about, right? If we know we want people who are going to understand how important it is to communicate clearly and effectively with their teammates. It's a hard thing to look for in a hiring process, but you need it. So you got to find it. Have you picked up anything about hiring, bringing the right people in? Any words of advice to, if I'm a frontline manager who's building a team for the first time, or I'm a chief sales officer in a new environment I got to rebuild? Any insight there you would share with the audience?
Yeah. I think, I've definitely made mistakes over the years when it comes to that. So, I've tried to learn some lessons. I think, and Corey's like the master in interviewing. He's very good. He has a really dialed in process, which I think actually is part of it. Like, you need to have some kind of process in place around hiring in terms of the types of questions you're asking. We have a whole kind of rubric that we come back to, that people are filling out independently. We come together as a team and we talk about it. And so that's one thing. I mean, I remember we had one of our old CROs at a previous startup, Frank Swain. He used to say, when he was hiring reps, I was looking for, reps that are smart, working hard, they can work hard and they're coachable. And I think that's an oversimplified version of it. Like, I think, which is a great way to, just like a great frame of reference for how you're thinking about these hires, especially coachability. I think it is incredibly important, because you could think you have someone that's right for the job, but if they're not willing to take feedback and iterate based on your business, then it can lead to, challenges down the road. But I do think having some kind of structure in place, and then, thinking about the type of talent that you need to really take you from where you are to where you need in the next, 12 to 18 months is important. And I definitely think coachability is another important factor for us.
Corey, I'm coming to you because we heard dialed in on the process, right? So you were going to jump in, so say something, but my question is, tell us more, Corey.
Yeah, I think the grass is greener. I had a quick question for Dave first, because this is something that what's on my mind has not been a challenge, a need. Well, let me explain my question here. It was going to be regarding hiring for roles that you've never done yourself. And what I mean there is, like, you're building out a full marketing, sales, and customer success organization. So marketing leads, BDRs, customer success managers, VPs of sales. I'm asking because this is not, like, for us, we built this 20 plus person organization, but effectively 90% plus people on the team are doing the same roles of different levels of experience and hierarchy there. And as we expand, we need to hire for functions like recruiting, sales, that are frankly seats that I haven't been in before. So I'm curious, Dave, how you've approached that as, like, hey, I'm hiring for this role that I know generally what they do, but I've never done it myself.
Yeah, such a great question. It's hard. I talk to people that, I trust, that have been in those roles, and they give me feedback on, hey, what you should look for. For example, when we were looking for marketing role, we got feedback that, you should look for people that are, maybe very vocal on LinkedIn about what they're doing, and really tactically the tasks that they're carrying out, because there's not really, any hiding from that. Plus, we were looking for someone in demand gen, so it kind of plays well into that. But I think finding that network of people that have those roles so that you can really bring those insights to you. And yeah, I think that has been something that we've been leaning into a lot.
I'm going to take two things out of that answer, Dave. One is the thing that let's get input from others who do know the role. Right? And I think about if you've been a sales manager, or maybe even a leader of leaders, and now you're moving into a CRO, revenue leadership. You got sales and marketing and rev ops and customer success, right? Having lived that, I had to hire a CS leader for the first time. I had absolutely no idea. I knew generally what they were going to do, but no idea what good looked like in the role. So I think I wish I knew someone at the time who had been like, these are the things you need to look for. But the other thing you said, and you were using specifically the demand gen example, looking at how somebody does the work, somebody who's doing that openly on LinkedIn, how does that apply to other roles? You want to see people at either real world or in a simulated environment. You want to see how they do it. So many of us who've been hired in sales jobs in the past, or we've had to go through the case study or the scenario where we've got to do a role play and demonstrate our ability to plan and execute a call. And so I think that's the thing. I have no idea how I would, what would I put a RevOps person through to understand if they were really effective at doing the job? Have them work on a project for a month, they're not going to do it. So it's tough, but then you have to lean on people who actually understand the job and get some insight from them. That's a really great point.
Right. And that goes back to the humility, what we were talking about earlier, which is, being able to ask, those around you and not pretending like you know the answer to everything. And Corey's got, a project that he gives out to folks, in their interview. And so that goes back to what you were just saying, Matt, which is around like, how are they actually executing on this role?
Right.
In a real world situation.
Yeah. Show me, right? Don't tell me how you do it. Show me how you do it. That's a better predictor. Corey, was there anything else on the hiring front? You asked a great question to Dave. I'm wondering, is there anything else that you would say about, because Dave mentioned you're pretty dialed in your process. Is there anything we haven't talked about yet when it comes to hiring the right people?
Yeah, dialed in is one way to say it. We have a process that we're constantly reiterating and blowing up. I think for me, it kind of reminds me of like when we're helping companies define sales processes and how that like evolves over time. One thing I think about is that companies naturally get more complex over time, and you need to fight that complexity. And so for us, we've we built our own applicant tracking system and had multiple rounds of interviews in this case study that we've made. But what we've realized recently is, okay, we built this up. Now it's time to pare it down, because otherwise we're going to have this natural trudge to complexity and bureaucracy, and our interview process started slowing down. So we actually had to cut a lot out and say, hey, it's 3 calls max. This case study that used to be this take home and presented thing is now just going to be in impromptu questions, getting the same, if not more value, while like ultimately making just the process a little bit smoother and just constantly reevaluating it. I think hiring is one of the toughest part, because you just have a very finite period of time to see what someone's going to be like over the long term. So I think part of it's too, just, outside of the process, is making sure we're trusting our gut, and we like to bet on potential over experience.
Yeah. Well, I think there's one thing we can take away, not only about the Skydog process for hiring the right people, but in general, when you have a really complex process for hiring people, vetting them and seeing if they can be effective in the role, you also have to think about their experience. What are they going through as they vie for a new role with an organization that clearly, not Skydog, the opposite, clearly has not put thought into simplifying the process, right? 7 interviews, 8 surveys, 9 profiling, so, just some crazy, and we'll get back to you in many months probably to let you know how it worked out. So I think that there's the other side of this, which is the simplicity that we achieve when we really think about, in this case, a hiring process, but any process. You're talking about sales process, same thing, right? There's a lot of work that's required to make a process simple and effective at the same time. If we don't do that, there's going to be impact for somebody else, the people we're trying to hire, for our customers, right? So kudos to you for for working at the simplicity. I know it's firsthand. It is not easy. All right, gentlemen, we're in the home stretch of this conversation. We've already covered some ground here, right? What are the key parts of the system? What are some of the lessons you've learned? I'm going to ask you a little bit about who you've learned from, who have your influences been. I know you've learned from each other. We've checked that box. We know that part, right? But who's had the most influence on you and your work as founders and leaders? I'm curious about that.
I'll hop in here. Someone, Dave, for me, I can think about a lot of people, both that I know and intimately, and those that I've just learned from, whether it's like books or social media. But for me, I had this model of my dad that Dave already mentioned, running an orthodontic practice as his dad did before him. And so just seeing a small business owner, and two things really stick out for me is, one is just that consistent operational excellence. So I saw someone that prioritized like great results over money and outcomes there. And, I think back to like thoughtful conversations I'd overhear where a tough case, he'd be calling peers from his prior education to weigh the pros and cons of an outcome, and had nothing to do with any like financial result that would come from that, but that like really like the care, and that blends into like, treating everyone with the level of service that you would expect. So that I do think that's like inherent to what we do, and like going the extra mile, and has been a big part for us of like, the biggest piece of feedback we hear is like they really deeply understand and care about our business and our results. And that's led to like really good just retention reviews, et cetera. So, someone I think about from a cultural perspective and how to do things the right way.
Yeah. Kudos to Dr. Schwitz. That's awesome, right? It's a great environment, great lessons to learn at an early age. Beautiful. Dave, how about you?
You're gonna get two dads here then. Yeah, I mean, my dad grew up very, very kind of modest upbringing in middle of nowhere, upstate New York, and where most people actually don't leave the town, And then he ended up moving to New York City, right? Then eventually New Jersey, and started his own business and commuted for 40 years to Wall Street every day. He would leave every morning at 4 a.m. and we would joke that he would be the only person on the bus with the bus driver. But it really taught me a lot about just putting in the work that needs to actually be, to be successful, to really start something, that you're proud of. And I think today, especially, this resonates because with, the advent of Gen AI, it's so easy to go out there and just get the answers to, anything you want and generate all this amazing content. But it comes down to execution, and there's no substitute for, putting in the work to really execute, know your customer, like Corey was talking about. We always used to talk about, as a sales organization, that there's so many external factors outside of the sales process that you can't control, but what you can control is your input. We know that we'll always out hustle the other reps, that we're competing against. And so that, at least we know that we've done our best, and that that'll give us a competitive edge, if not the order of magnitude engineering teams that can, outcode us, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Kudos to Mr. Levy. Right. So, right. Look, I think it's true of most of the successful people that I know, that I've met and got to know over the years, that we did learn something early. There's something we were exposed to in our home life or school or at, competitive sports or whatever. And it is important to acknowledge who we learn these lessons from. I'll see your two dads and add a third. For me, I hear my dad's voice. So I grew up in northern New Jersey. My father was from the Bronx. My mother was from Queens. My father was a Bronx Irish Catholic, pretty, direct, great, wonderful guy, right? But the KISS principle was the thing that rang in my brain for most of and still does in my professional life. Keep it simple, stupid, right? The KISS principle. So I think about how would my dad react to the things that we built, and be like, it's too complex. It's too, right? Keep it simple, clean it up, right? But I do think I I think we've all benefited, right, from great examples, work ethic, customer care, really like being humble enough to prepare and get other people's input was the other kind of example I pulled from Corey's dad's story. So wonderful. That's why I asked the question. I think it's fun to hear kind of where did this all come from? It didn't come out of nowhere. All right, last question for you both. I'm going to ask you a purposely vague, big open question, and it is so that I can grab one more gem out of each of you for our audience. Remember, the people listening, aspiring sales managers, current sales managers, leaders of leaders, right, from grizzled veterans down to people who are just in the job for the first time. What else do they need to know from your experience? What else? So Dave, Corey, jump in. What's your what else?
Yeah, I mean, I think people ask me career advice a lot. Should they stay at a company? Should they leave a company? And I try to kind of break it down into like more digestible questions. Like, okay, are you getting paid well? Are you growing at the company? Is there personal growth for you? And do you like the people you're working with? Are you happy on a daily basis? I try and now flip that around and keep that in mind when, we have a team. It's all of these amazing people that we've been able to hire. They have a lot of options and they're spending a lot of time with us. And so, it's not lost on me that we have to make sure that we're doing right by them and making sure that they're always growing, that we're creating an environment that people, enjoy being around each other. Yesterday someone sent, two people went out with their spouses and they sent photos. They just went out in the town. And so the fact that we can create, an environment where people really enjoy working together and learning from each other, I think that's incredibly important.
Great. Yeah, I heard I was in a meeting a few years ago and there was a senior leader from LinkedIn and she said, talent has a choice. And we were talking about what does it take to build an environment that people want to stay and grow. So it's kind of a similar idea. Like these people have options. We need to create an environment that they really enjoy. And that's more than just, I take it, if that's more than just the perks, the free lunch and the stuff that we've heard about in the tech industry for years and years. It's more like there's more to it than that, right? It's,
No, it's developing them personally so they can work on, new projects, new types of deals. Maybe they're a mid-market rep that wants to go into enterprise, or maybe it's an SDR that wants to go into commercial selling. And yeah, you have a real opportunity to give them that ownership. And I think that eventually will pay dividends.
Yeah. Beautiful. Great. Corey, what else?
Yeah. What else? A too broad and dangerous question to ask someone as I think opinionated and verbose, I think, as I am. So, but for me, something I am constantly learning and making mistakes and improving upon is regarding coaching and managing a team is knowing when to step in and knowing when to step out and let people run wild. We have such an amazing team right now, a team that wants to own it and lead things, but also wants to be coached. So, that balance of knowing when to step in versus when to step out has been a really tough balance for me, because say someone's just starting, kind of their expectation is, hey, you're going to be coached pretty consistently, but over time there needs to be this place where they're kind of they're gaining skills, confidence, where you do step out, let them run free, let them make those mistakes, and that pivot tends to be actually pretty comfortable and easy for me. Where I struggle is when someone is running free and they're doing many great things well, is knowing when and if I should jump in. So there are various reasons of maybe someone's doing overall great job, but I need to make sure that there's one thing to like correct and focus on. Or maybe someone actively wants support, they're just hesitant to ask for help because they think that would not reflect well on their independence. So there's no like clear answer for me here, but I think just realizing that I need to be like very intentional in either way, especially when I'm jumping back into with working on something with someone, whether it's giving feedback or some skill that they need to focus on. And I think that, I've learned I just need to be very intentional, not do it sporadically, and also kind of explain. And again, going back to prior themes, really repeat of like, we have high trust and why there is a need to jump back in or jump out, and make sure those lines of communication are open. Just saying that this is a point I don't think I have mastered by any means, and is very kind of top of mind, especially as we scale and I have less time to interface with everyone individually.
Yeah. Well, I would tell you, it sounds to me, knowing this lesson personally, right? I totally get what you're describing. It's not the first lesson you learn about leading. It takes a little bit of time for you to realize, okay, there is kind of a right point for me to jump in, and other situations where I'm going to hang back and kind of let this slide, or let it go, or hang on to this. Do you have any idea when you learned that? Was there a specific situation or something where you're like, you know what, I'm going to ease up, or I'm going to pull back? Can you think of was there anything that triggered that learning for you?
Yeah, I've thought about this before. I don't think I've ever learned it. I think it actually becomes learning to when to jump out becomes a necessity of having too much to do,
Yeah.
And it sort of naturally evolves over time in that regard.
Yeah.
And learning when you need to jump back in is when, I think, I don't have a perfect heuristic for this, but is, when something, hey, you see something you want to correct or speak up on, probably the first time's not the right time to do it. But if you've written, thought about it enough, it's the third time, it's kind of occupying brain space. You're talking about it maybe with someone else on the team you trust. That's probably the time when, hey, I need to get this out of my brain and make sure that it's articulated in the right way. And I've just found, again, we have such a great team that people are eager to hear that. And I just think people justifiably need clarity, especially in this remote working world where communication isn't happening. It needs to be very intentional.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, it might just be you realize that because you just can't, right? You can't invest the time, and you can't correct every little thing. But the flip side of that is, maybe the best thing for me to do right now is hold my thoughts and reserve this for a development conversation when it's appropriate for me to bring it up, because observations can be powerful, but they need to be shared in the right way in the right moment, right? So brilliant.
Yeah, definitely something I've struggled with, because, if you need to slow yourself down and present it in the right way.
Yeah. I think you and probably most people listening here, right? It's like I said, it's not the first lesson you learn about leading. It tends to be part of the maturation as a leader. Gentlemen, it's been awesome. I appreciate the insight. We've pulled a bunch out of your brains. And now what I'm going to try to do for the audience is boil it all down to maybe 3 or 4 key points. And I'm going to challenge them to think about, how do you take what Dave and Corey just said about X and Y and Z and apply it to your world? Before I do that, thank you both. And you're extremely busy. Your time's valuable. I really enjoyed having you join the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
My only regret in having Corey and Dave on the show is I couldn't keep them longer. But they both have such great perspectives as founders and leaders and partners to revenue leaders. So I want to thank them again. We heard a few things that I want to play back and then challenge you to think about. How does this apply to me? Some of the insights they shared are specific to frontline leadership, and others are really kind of broader for more leader of leaders, more strategic or executive leadership roles. But that's the challenge, right? How do we take these and then turn them into something actionable for you, where you may be a frontline manager for now, but think about some of these lessons for the future. When I asked about the system, right, I'm going to kind of combine answers here, because both Dave and Corey offered some great points. They talked about the foundation matters, and you need to keep it simple. Related to that, we talked a little bit about process orientation to the business, another key part of the system. And it was Corey who used the analogy of a SWAT team, right? They clears a room sort of tactically, one room cleared at a time, meaning, start with one team, start with one process, get your processes down, be able to explain them clearly. So we can kind of call that one big item, right? Get the foundation right. It matters, but definitely keep it simple. We also heard from them both that it takes some work to get there, right? To get it simple. We also talked about prioritization and being able to effectively and clearly communicate what we expect of our teams. That came up a little bit later in the conversation, but I think we can say, yeah, that's obviously part of their systems, right? Two different businesses, yet very similar outlook in terms of communication. What does it take to really make sure that people understand what we need them to do, how the work needs to be done? That was where I think Corey shared the idea of the chief repetition officer. He'd quoted someone else who was talking about that as a senior leader, a revenue leader, or a chief sales officer, depending on the title, you may find yourself having to repeat what is expected of people over and over and over and over again. And that, frankly, that's just part of the job. We spent some time talking about hiring the right people and putting the right system in place to get the outcome that we want. We spent a fair amount of time talking about hiring the right people because, let's face it, at least in my experience, that may be one of the more difficult things to do consistently well as you run a sales or revenue organization. Corey, who, as Dave put it, is a really dialed in process, shared some great ideas that I hope you'll take away. One of the things that I took away from the conversation relates maybe more to those who are, and maybe you've been a frontline sales manager for a while, and now you're taking on a leader of leaders role, or maybe you're a chief sales or chief revenue officer and you have other functions that you need to hire for. And maybe these are roles that you've never done. So we talked about getting input and trusting the input from others who do know those roles to really try to help you to form up a clear vision of what the profile should look like, and also give you some input on how would you even vet candidates for roles like, revenue ops leadership or customer success leadership or marketing leadership, if now all of a sudden you find yourself having to hire for those roles. Or maybe you're just playing a role as a member of a team hiring for those roles. So look, we could go on to share and go deep into some of the lessons that Corey and Dave shared, but I'm going to challenge you to think about how those those elements of their system, what are the kind of the ideas they shared on getting the right people into the organization, because I want to just challenge you to think about just a few things. Maybe you took something else away. That's okay. In our next episode, I'm going to talk with a very passionate and articulate leader. He's going to share some great ideas about the system that he's built to ensure that people succeed and achieve the outcomes that they want to achieve. I will look forward to having you join us for that conversation and encourage you to come back. In the meantime, I'm Matt McDarby, host of the Sales Leaders Operating System podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye for now.